Hi, Brother James. This is Lindsay Moeller, and this is my final presentation for CIT 261. This is my journal report, and I'm just going to give a little synopsis or highlight week by week. So here it goes. So the journal started in week 1 in the introduction lesson, and in that I just reflected on watching the interactive Prezi presentation on the big picture of what this class was and how it was structured and why it was structured the way it was. The other important thing from that week was just getting all of the accounts set up that I would need so that I could collaborate with my team in the upcoming weeks. In lesson 1, that was where we were to present our elevator pitch, which was just a short video that explained our idea for the app, the problem it solved, and the people who'd be using it, and how the code topics that we were going to learn were going to be used. And the app that I pitched was a time tracking app, like a timer, that almost got developed by our team, but then we went a different direction. And this was the first time that I'd seen or even heard of some of these words like JSON and AJAX and DOM. So it's pretty intimidating to try to determine how they would be used in my app. I felt a little lost, and one of my journals even said the only thing I wasn't completely sure on was how each of these 9 learning objectives would be covered in the app, mainly because I'm not sure what they are. So then in lesson 2, that was the first week of meeting with our teams. And we set a schedule and we discussed everybody's app idea. And then I gave my first teaching presentation, which was on JSON. And I was super overwhelmed trying to understand what JSON did and how it did it and how the information was written to and read from a file. And I think that week probably produced more questions than actual understanding. Then week 3, I gave my teaching presentation on DOM, which ended up being my favorite topic of all. Learned about how it treats HTML as a tree structure of objects that can create dynamic HTML. And one interesting thing from this week was that another team member presented on JavaScript, and we had really similar code doing similar things, which at the time I didn't understand, but now I can see that using DOM, you can use JavaScript to create the dynamic HTML. So in lessons 4 through 6, 4 and 5 I presented on AJAX and then animations. And when researching and learning about AJAX, I thought this was the hardest topic of all. I didn't get what it was doing or how, and even how to implement it. So that was frustrating, but I did overcome that eventually. Then in lesson 5, I taught on CSS3 animations, and that was another one of my favorites. I implemented it into my DOM example, and I loved the results. I played with changing colors and movement, and I could have spent a lot of time just doing fun things. So then in week 7, I went back to learning AJAX and spent the next 2 weeks just going over it, and eventually I would say I mastered it. And later when we were building our team app, I was the one that ended up doing the implementation of AJAX as the transitioning between questions, since I'd spent so much time and it wasn't the hardest for me anymore. So lessons 7 and 8 were causes of great frustration for me. I finished my 4 teaching presentations, and so I was just ready to learn from my teammates. But that first week, no one showed up. No one had said that they weren't going to be there, but nobody came. I waited at the meeting hangout place for like 20 minutes, and there was just a real lack of communication from everyone. And at that point, our team was really disjointed. Some members we still hadn't heard from at all. It caused me a lot of stress to not know that I knew that we were going to start to build this app, and I didn't really rely on anybody at that point. And then we also hadn't narrowed down our app idea either. So thinking about how to implement all of these topics by each of us that weren't really communicating, it was just really stressful. But then in week 9, in lessons 9 and 10, um, uh, we began to get some leadership. Some team members were consistently showing up and proving their willingness to work, and we, at that point, narrowed down our choice for the app that we wanted to develop, and we wrote down how we were going to implement each of the topics, which didn't end up being exactly how each of them were implemented, but we at least had a plan to go off of. And then we determined how, we determined that we kind of wanted to create this more collectively than individually, especially because some members still hadn't finished their portfolios, and though we knew how each topic was going to be implemented, we kind of stopped there, and nothing really got built that first week. We just came up with a plan, but then we stopped. And so I started stressing out a lot. So I kind of took the initiative that week, and though I wasn't sure of myself, I wasn't sure I could do it, my anxiety kind of got the best of me, and so I just started building a skeleton for the app. And I did all the HTML and included the JavaScript events and DOM, and it even added a little bit of CSS animations. I just knew that I needed to start somewhere rather than just talking about it. We needed to actually have something to show. And so getting over that initial hurdle and just getting something was relieving for me. And then from there, it kind of gave our team some momentum. And those who had been there consistently and been engaged, they kind of stepped up and took on some work too. And so that was where I feel like we got into our good rhythm. We started collaborating more consistently than we had. And another member that kind of had not been present, she started showing up again. And it was just good working together. So then by week 11, we had everything done besides the Ajax to switch between pages. And then we didn't have a use for JSON either. And our group met at least twice a week for the last 2 weeks. And we really just banded together to get through some of the harder things. And I was assigned to figure out that Ajax transitions between pages or between questions of our app, like I said. And it was intimidating, but I jumped into it and I looked back at what I had done, and I was actually able to figure it out pretty quickly. And then once we had it figured out, we could just copy it over and over for each transition that we needed. And so then things really started coming together then. The JSON and CSS were added last, and in that last week, but by the time we were all back in regular communication and we were backing each other up, and where and when we needed, we just worked together really well. And it was my favorite week of the whole semester because everything that we had struggled with didn't matter anymore, because where one person had a weakness, Spencer, I was